Action!
Okay, so welcome back to Set Notes. I'm here with Rodney Charters, who's had a illustrious career, 50 years, shooting television, film and documentary. We're going to go through many things. We're going to talk about some of his work, some of the work that you'll be more familiar with, and his connection to technology and how he's still kind of super enthusiastic about the new movements in cinematography. We're going to talk about LED volumes. We're going to talk about lenses, lighting. We're going to talk about some of the films he's worked on over the years. We're going to talk about his television show 24 that if you're not familiar with, you should be. Yeah, we're going to cover loads of stuff. So strap in. So, well, I mean, the first thing to say is that, you know, you've had, I mean, doing a bit of research for this talk, I just couldn't believe how much you've shot over the years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you were saying yourself that it's quite shocking for you to even take it in, the amount you shot.
Yeah. It's amazing. I can turn on streaming services and find something that I shot, almost every service. It's amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
Crazy.
That's quite a body of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had great luck to be on a series that ran for 10 years straight. And, 9 years, there was a writer's strike, that actually went very badly for the writers, fortunately.
Would you say that the show that you're referring to is 24, of course? Would you say that that's a watershed moment in your career? Was it kind of like...
Oh, absolutely. It catapulted me into... I went, in the break between seasons, I went to Japan because I loved Japan. It was an experience to go. And I think one of my children was there. And I said to Fox corporate people, look, I could do some interviews there. And they said, okay. And I hadn't directed anything at that point, but I ended up doing 9 interviews in one day just as the DP on this crazy, because the Japanese went nuts for the show. They didn't serialize it. It came out on cassette once a week. And you go into a video store and there'd be 1,000 cassettes on racks waiting for the Japanese in Tokyo to pick them up. It was happening all across the country.
So
and Britain was like that too.
One episode was one video.
One video. And they changed the videos once a week. It was VHS, yeah.
Because I remember my experience of watching it, because I remember very, very clearly when I first saw it, because it changed my viewing of television. Because what I did with my girlfriend at the time was we binge watched it.
Yeah.
And we had to watch 2.5 episodes because one episode wasn't enough. 2 episodes, you couldn't get to the end of the second episode because the cliffhangers were so, like, it was like a drug.
Yeah.
I'd never seen anything. I'd never had a viewing experience previously that felt like a drug. Like you had to have more. You had to know more. Yeah. So we had to go through we had to go halfway into an episode and then force ourselves to stop it. Because if we got to the end, then the cliffhanger would kick in and we'd have to watch another episode.
We were always in people's houses filming, and always they would say, for God's sake, don't tell us what's going on. Why you're here, we don't want to know. And then we'd put them in a hotel, of course. And they said, we're waiting for the box set to come out at Christmas. So they were completely dead ears right through this whole season of transmission until the box set came up, and then they would binge it. And, 2 days of straight up 24 hours a day, people would do that.
Yeah.
And it was like a drug, absolutely.
I can't remember before that of having personally. I didn't have that experience before.
No.
So is that a cultural thing? Do you think that was the first point of binge watching TV?
The fact that the box set came out, I think,
coincided with
it ushered in the whole notion of binging.
Yeah.
Because prior to that, you had to do the Japanese thing, and you only got 1 episode a week. And of course, in Britain, it was the same.
Yeah.
It was broadcast, and that was it.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of older folk who would say, my wife cannot watch the show unless we have a break. We need to control it because it's so terrifying to her.
Yeah.
And her blood pressure goes through the roof, and I'm frightened that she's going to have an event,
So the cinematography had a lot to do with that, didn't it? I mean, part of the concept was the time concept. Do you want to explain a little bit to people that haven't seen the show?
Yes. Well, the first thing that was fascinating, of course, it was a real-time event. So we would stay in one location for 3 weeks at a time sometimes. We scheduled 2 hours to be shot for 45 minutes as a 15-day block. And I was the only cinematographer on it, so it was amazing. It was helpful to me because we didn't change locations that often. And if there was, they would cut me loose, and B camera would come in and take over for a day to scout. But the critical thing was that you were real time, easy location. Once you got there, you could light it. But the big challenge was that the director, Stephen Hopkins, wanted to shoot everything in real time. So if it was a 5-page scene with Kiva running through CTU, you had to follow it. So A camera was always handheld. We managed to get XLs, and it was Super 35. So we were with 3-perf, and we had a 6-minute 400 roll and a 16-minute 1,000-foot roll. But often, because Kiefer would like to repeat the take immediately without interference, we would roll 3 times on a 5-page scene, only with the 1,000-footer.
And were you using free perf? Just explain to the audience. Free perf is free perforations of pull down per frame.
It naturally gave you. It was an invention of Canadian, Scandinavians. There was a group of people that brought it in. With 3-perf gave you a 16:9 frame automatically.
Yeah.
The gate, of course, had to be changed in the camera.
Yeah.
But your running time went up
increased, so you could have a 1,000-foot load, and it would last for, how long would a 1,000-foot?
16 minutes.
Right, and that was important to try and get this
1,000-foot was normally 10,
right.
So you got a lot more running time.
Yeah, and that was important to give it this feeling of time, no break in time kind of thing, so long takes.
In the directorial kind of intent, after you blocked and got things going, first off, Kiefer wouldn't read the script really thoroughly unless it was something you needed to tell him about. He would come in, and he had this wonderful woman who was a reader for him, and she was the only one that could read at the pace that he delivered his dialogue. If you look at the
so he had an earpiece then?
No. He would learn it right on the spot.
Oh,
he'd come in at 6 a.m, and we'd be ready, and by 7 o'clock, 7:30, 8, we were rolling by 8. He'd learned all of the lines that he needed, and he would rewrite them on the spot, and we'd issue pages, and the writers kind of didn't want to get involved with Kiefer in a battle over dialogue. And so he made it his own. And quite frequently he would come in and look at the blocking and say, I would not do that. I'm going to come in this door and not that door. And so you'd be flying on the seat of your pants to relight.
Did that help the energy on set of not knowing where you were going?
The energy went up tenfold when he was on the set. And we would have 5 parallel stories. So you got a little bit of respite when Kiefer had gone and you were dealing with other characters. But when he was on set, it was intense.
Right.
And that's the energy that is easily filmable at that point.
Right.
And we never got in the way of it. We gave him freedom to go anywhere. We didn't set marks. I had to light in the surround, light the space, because half the time you'd be looking at him bursting through a door, you'd track backwards with him, and then you'd make a 180 pan to the other character in the room. One of those great scenes where he breaks into a cell and there's a guy in there in chains, and he kneecaps him right on camera. Just doesn't even pause, and stuff that had never been seen before. One of the first times we realized that we had a lot of power, well, first was 9/11 happened while we were shooting the second episode, and we were immediately and there's
weird parallels about what was happening in the writing.
Because the pilot featured a woman taking an airliner hostage and then parachuting out of it, and we had to make some changes because Fox said we can't put this out in the wake of, because they were due to go to air almost a few months later, so we had to make changes. And then one day in the second episode or the third episode, Kiefer was struggling with a Taliban baddie, AK-47, and Stephen said, put the muzzle of the gun right against his head. And we said, so you can't do that. It's code. You have to put the muzzle at the neck. He said, put the muzzle at his head, squatting down profile. So there was no way you could get around this.
As in code that this could never be broadcast.
Yes. Yeah. The studios had these codes about behavior with weapons. And the next day he said, that's what we're going to shoot. And we did.
And this is Kiefer who demanded this?
No, it wasn't Kiefer. It was in conjunction. He was very close. He was always an exec on the show. And Stephen and him were very tight.
Stephen being the director?
Yeah, Stephen Hopkins.
Yeah.
And he did 12 episodes the first season. So he really set the tone for what the series is. He introduced the idea of multiple imagery.
So when he when other directors took over, they carried that template forward.
Absolutely,
And, it was set then.
And actually, there were very few other directors. The two guys did, 100 of the episodes between them, maybe more, 150.
How much do you think your documentary training kind of prepared you for this television work?
It was everything without realizing it, because some of the most fun moments of my career as a documentarian were fly on the wall, slating a roll, and having 10 minutes. You pointed at the floor, there was nothing happening, but you'd make moves around the character so you could have cut points and all of that kind of stuff without hiding in the walls of the house or wherever you were, whatever behavior was going on. So it lent itself easily to my understanding that Stephen said, okay, I'm at this end of CTU and we have 100 feet to the other end, and Kiefer's going to walk from here. He's going to go to this desk. He's go to that desk. He talk to Chloe. Then he's going to exit that at the back, and I want to shoot in its entirety. So we would cover it with the handheld camera, tracking behind him, to the side of him. We had a B camera all the time, which had, in that setup, we had with a 420 lens on it, 150 to 420, which was a 2.8. Wide open. Everything was wide open. And there's a short zoom, which was a Steadicam zoom that Panavision had put together, which was Casino glass.
Can I just ask you quickly, were you wide open for aesthetic reasons or just is practical reasons?
It was practical. The stock was 500 ISO. And if we went out on the street at night, I pushed it. And for all of the car playback work that we were cheating with rear projectors, 2 screens, parked around the car, and they were very successful, but only at 1,000. So I had to push it at stop.
Right.
And
the
grain
focus pullers must have been, really earning their money.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Fox objected to $500,000 in stock and processing, everything. And they pushed like crazy for me to try all the new cameras, Panavisions. Everybody had a digital camera that we tried, and eventually they did side by side, and Kiefer looked at his face and said, not my face on that, pointing at the digital one. So that was the end of it. So we finished the whole series on film. And then none of us really have ever shot film since. I mean, there are a few lucky souls. Yeah. But I'm happy to take advantage of the digital.
Right. So so at the end of 24 for you, that was when you moved into digital with every preceding kind of.
And I did a series on the Red 1, which was interesting.
Yeah.
There were challenges there, and the second season
Was that your first foray into digital, was Red 1?
On a show, yes. Yes,
so you finished 24 on film and then you moved into shooting with the Red 1.
Towards the end, the 5D came out, and through our connections, we managed to get them on the set. Shameless was after, and that was on the Red 1.
That's the Red 1.
But the 5D showed up, and we tested it alongside our film and went, oh my God, because you could hardly tell the difference. And, we put an 11:1 on it, so it was crazy with this tiny box on one end and this giant lens. And we all went, this is a new world.
So when
we didn't use them on the show itself. What we used them for were all the plates. So we had 9 5Ds.
So we're talking about Shame.
No, this is on 24 still.
This is on 24 still.
Right, so on 24.
So you had, I see. So you're using a 5D on 24
eventually, yes, to replace the DV cams.
Right.
We'd always have 9 cameras, but there was DV cams in the beginning.
Right.
We had little manila envelopes full of cassettes that were this angle, that angle.
So you had two main film cameras, or how many?
Yeah, there were 2. There was an A and a B. A was always 27 mil in your face, right alongside Kiefer. It was Super 35. And B camera was always on this long lens.
Just on 400.
Yeah, and he'd be on 40 foot of track, diagonal. Nightmare for focus pulling. We ended up getting a laser system, a white laser that you couldn't see.
And that was constantly just on his on Kiefer's.
And so the challenge is, if you were photographing me like this, A camera would be right here, and their map box would start clipping the edge of the B camera shot, because they'd have to move 6 feet just to clear an inch.
Yeah, right.
So my battle was always about policing.
And were you operating in the frame at the time?
No. My first series, which was a horror series in Toronto, I ended up doing everything, and they hired a DP from LA as a director on an episode, and he came up and he said to me, this is going to kill you. You cannot do both. These are two separate jobs.
Yeah.
You need to relinquish it. And he talked them into giving me an operator, which probably saved my life because it was insanely challenging to do fast late night television series in the outskirts of the empire. You know, for Toronto, we had to work pretty fast to keep our space, you know, but brand new people, Toronto didn't have a long career of cinema. Of course, it does now. There are multiple generation people, but it was only when I got to Hollywood that there were people on my team that were 4 generations as gaffers or grips or electrics. You know, it's amazing.
So was that hard for you to give up the looking for the eyepiece? Because at the time, were you lighting for the eyepiece when you were shooting film?
I was. I had a great gaffer, and it was a challenge for me because the very first show I did was a 16mm late night television thing for CBS. And literally, I was given the job to take over, and I'd only done documentary before. So set prep protocol, understanding who was who on the set, what their jobs were, was all foreign to me. And so
and what show was this?
It was a late night telly series. It was 16mm. I can't remember the name of it. It's on the IMDb. If I scroll down, I find it there.
Yeah.
But it was a lovely working experience. And I bought a little Cook 10-30 because it was 16mm and shot it on an SR2. And we had a lot of fun. It was a good learning experience.
This was 1980.
It would be in the 80s. Yeah. It was early days for me, but I'd done a series
actually.
The last doco series I did was with Gerald Durrell. It was a series called Durrell in Russia.
Yeah.
And we shot that on 16mm, and then this other cinematographer, Mark Irwin, who had been he'd done The Fly and so on for Cronenberg.
Yeah.
Cronenberg took too long to write, and he said, I'm out of here, and he went to Hollywood. And he said, I'm gone, but I'm going to give you this series because I'd done a hockey movie with him called Youngblood on B camera, which was a nightmare because it was 90 frames a second for us following the puck on ice with fog. It was insane.
Before we talk more on that, let's go, because this is quite a good moment to go back into where it all originated from.
Yeah.
So you showed me, I saw you at your talk last week, and you had some really great footage of the beginnings of your career, and you were quite influenced by. Let me ask you this: when would you say you first had a sense of what cinema was? When as a child?
New Zealand was very well off. There was a struggle right after the war, but by the time I was conscious of going to the cinema, we had 5 cinemas in a town of 20,000. It was crazy, but there was no television, so cinema was where you went. And interestingly, my dad had in '53 when the Queen came to our town, he made a documentary about the event. He pre-shot the town.
So your dad was a photographer?
He was a photographer, and so I very early grew up in the darkroom. It was the magic of processing. I had my own camera and I shot.
So you remember from being a child that you had a fascination with?
Yeah. There's pictures of me with a little 8mm movie camera.
Yeah.
And my brother and I performed in movies that he made about it.
And your father was a stills photographer? He
was a stills guy, but he loved movies. There was a society. They would bring in French movies, 16mm, and the town people that were into imagery and drama would go to the film society. And he got the idea to make a little movie about me when I was about 7, about a goat that had been, it was my childhood goat, and it ran away, and I got my foot trapped on the railway station train.
So a little narrative that your father wrote.
Yeah, it was great.
And you starred in it?
I starred in it, yeah. And so...
Do you still have that? Anyway?
Yeah. It's quite memorable. And the Queen's visit, they shot black and white when she arrived and processed it by hand, exposed it. It was reversal film, and then spliced it into the color. And got a cert for it from Wellington, went down on the rail car, came back, and they played it in the cinema 3 days after she left. So it was a fun experience because it wasn't Hollywood at all, but it had all of the foundation of that. And I got access to his 16mm Bolex and was able to use it at college. But that was a time at art school, nobody had any equipment, so it was beg and borrow, and
So you never really had a stage in your life of not knowing what you were going to do? When you were older, was it always a given that you were going to end up doing that?
No, I went to university wanted to study architecture, but theoretical physics stumped me. The practical was fine, but algebra and intense math, I didn't have a moment for that. And so I started going to the cinema. There were lots of them in Auckland. I could go for 4 movies a day and skip classes. So that kind of made it happen for me. But at the same time, I never had a pathway to drama. I knew that I wanted to shoot, but documentaries seemed accessible. And even out of the Royal College, after I finished the course there, documentaries were what I was doing,
So this is now coming to the UK. So you studied initially architecture. Was that in New Zealand?
The University of Auckland in New Zealand, and failed to get into the architecture school and segued into the art school.
Right.
And there was a very fine still photographer there who'd been a Time Life guy.
And this is still in Auckland. You're in the art school
still,
in Auckland.
Still there.
So this is like equivalent to a BA in Bachelor of Arts. Yeah.
Yes. And then I made the short film with my dad's Bolex, and it got into a film festival in Sydney, and we all trooped off to attend, which was wild.
Yeah.
And then it got me into the Royal College.
Right.
I think
And the Royal College what's that, an MA?
It was an MA.
Yeah.
And in those days, there was a film school based in the at Natural History Museum. There was a whale dissecting room that was quite vast, and that became our studio.
Yeah.
And down Queensgate.
Yeah.
But after the National Film School took hold in Beaconsfield, they abandoned the program. So
right. So you were at the Royal College of Art MA. What's that? A 2-year course? Is it?
It was 3 years.
3-year course.
Yeah.
And did you get your hands on actual film cameras? And you would?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you go through all the different crafts of filmmaking?
As best they could. Tony Scott was a year ahead of me in the same school, and Ridley, of course, had already gone through the graphics department. RSA was already set up. So I ended up, when I graduated, working for Tony and Ridley and commercials. I hung around. And then I went to the States, and then ended up in Canada for 20 years of doing documentaries. Until the drama came at me.
What were the points where you graduated in the UK, you worked for Tony and Ridley Scott. What was the notion of then travelling to the States? What were you going to shoot? It was
an interesting story. In my second year, a pop group from the States called Seals and Crafts came, and they were Baha'is. And I was a Baha'i. My mum had found the faith early on, and I'd become a Baha'i in Japan on my way over to England. And they came and played the Roundhouse, and I did a documentary about them, their being here and what their beliefs were and so on. And I wanted to sell it to the Baha'is in the States.
So could you explain what a Baha'i is?
The Baha'i faith is a world religion that springs out of the background of Islamic teachings, but it basically teaches that all religious revelation is coming from the same God, and that the fundamental teachings are essentially the same, but they're modified for the group of people amongst whom they were given. So that now we've come of age, we know that we're a planet, and we know the only future for mankind is to be peaceful and unite. We can't do it any other way. And so those are the teachings of Baha'u'llah, this prophet. 1868, he appeared and gave these teachings. And so the world center is in Haifa because his body is there. He was exiled there, what was Akka in the old days. So Jimmy and Dash, many of their songs talk about the teachings of the faith, and so they're quite spiritual. So I find myself now in a documentary mode, bought a couple of FX6s, and we're struggling to put together.
You're revisiting this story now.
Absolutely.
After bookends
50
your career
years.
in a way.
Yeah.
So you started off doing a documentary, and now you're back with digital cameras.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I actually was in the studio when they were cutting the Summer Breeze title track in Los Angeles. And my friend Jack was their keyboardist, and he traveled with them for 4 years. So we're doing this documentary now.
So you said 50 years of shooting.
Yeah.
Has it been 50 years?
Well, the little document, the film, 10-minute film that got me into the college was 1966, I think, 66, 67. It took a while to finish it.
And how long were you in? So you left the UK, you went to America, and then were you shooting?
I couldn't get permission to stay there, and I needed money, and I was at the Liberty Bell, and I met a couple of Canadians with stickers all over their camera and their recorder, and they said, "Oh, come Toronto. There's lots of work in Toronto." So I went there, and because I was a New Zealander, I got into the country without issues, and got a work permit, and then never really looked back.
And so, what were you shooting at first? What was your way in?
I very quickly got a job with a private network, CTV, and was part of they had 5 crews doing a 60-minute style show. And so I was suddenly on the plane being sent all over the world.
And this is the period of your career where you were shooting documentary, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was 16 mil. My dad helped me buy an Arri 1, SR1. And that was my beast for 20 years almost. 1, 2, and 3 in the end. And then this drama experience began. And I said goodbye to docos.
And so the first drama was the one we were referring to earlier?
The first one that I got with was called, it was a hockey movie. God, what was it called? It's the most popular hockey movie out there, with Patrick Swayze was in it. Called Youngblood.
Youngblood.
Yeah, the movie was called Youngblood. Right. And we all knew each other in Toronto because it was a small community. When the first footage came back from the space with the IMAX camera, which was all Toronto, they screened it down at a big IMAX theater that they had there, and everybody in Toronto went to screen this footage.
What's it called? Youngblood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
1986 Youngblood.
Yeah.
And this was your first narrative.
He came to me, Mark Irwin, the DP, came and said, "Look, I want you to shoot B camera on this."
Yeah.
And he said, "Look, it's the same. The camera weighs a bit more. The magazines are obviously heavier." And I was like, okay.
So that's going from 16 to 35.
Yeah. Just start like that.
How did you notice, because I've always, when I shot 16, my career started with 16 as well. And when I jumped to 35 for the first time, I was really disappointed because I loved the kind of the forgiving nature of 16. It had a sort of magical quality to it. When I went to 35, everything looked too real and sharp. And the flaws in my lighting were way more obvious than on 16, when I kind of got away with murder, I felt.
Well, in the case of this movie, Mark was lighting it. And he's a soft light guy.
Yeah.
And it was more or less a documentary because it was a lot about the hockey action on the ice. So we had a peewee with skates on it, and all those kind of tricks
being slid
that you
around
do.
the ice.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah.
But going out of focus at 90 frames a second is embarrassing, and we had dailies in those days.
Right, so you had to watch loads of those slow motion.
Most embarrassing thing, and there'd be a few frames near the end. And that's truthfully all they needed to use. But when you're in with the whole team is watching, and you go, "Oh my God!"
So your day, you would start your day by watching a previous days of rushes.
No, we watch them in the evening. But
yeah,
and we saw the previous day. Yeah, it was a horrendous experience. I mean, I got used to doing that, and in the end, I got into trouble on a movie in LA. And Alan Davio was available. I was able to phone him because he's such a lovable guy. And I had a long chat with him. He said, "Oh, no, you have to go to the high-speed daily screening in the morning." I said, "What time is that?" And he said, 5 a.m. So you had to get up at that time, drive to the lab, high-speed screening dailies. And if you didn't like anything, they were lovely. They would reprint. They would make adjustments for you.
And then after that, you go on to set.
Yeah, go on to set.
How many?
See, lunches, dailies were at lunch, but by then you didn't have that anxiety because you'd already seen them, and that was a great thing about film. There was terror because you commit to an exposure, you commit to something you think it's working, but you really don't know, and you don't know what the lab's going to do with it or how. I didn't have a long experience of watching 35mm dailies.
So you sleep better at night now. You shoot digital.
Yeah, unbelievable. It's a piece that is not part of that early experience. Do you find that
you take more? Because I've realised with my work is that I took more risks with lighting now than when I was shooting film.
Yeah.
So I can be way more edgy with lighting now.
Yes.
Whereas before I kind of wanted to be edgy, but I was so worried that I was going to get sacked. Yeah.
You always give yourself a little bit more that you. No, I absolutely agree. The beauty of digital is a peace of mind, and also that, yes, you can experiment. And it's not so good that everybody has a monitor now, including the back office is watching now, because we have Frame.io going. I'm not such a fan of Frame.io.
Yeah. So I guess this one for me on commercials. It's they say a racehorse designed by committees a camel, and the monitor was that big change. It was suddenly they saw behind the magician's cloth for the first time, and they went, "Oh, is that actually what we're getting?" And the moment we honestly had to say yes, then everyone piled in, and then you had this kind of committee around the monitor. And that changed. I think that fundamentally changed the DOP's role. Because we could no longer kind of like protect our own artistic integrity.
Absolutely. I was doing a job in Vancouver, Toronto. From Toronto, they started taking me to Vancouver, and Conrad Hall was in town shooting Jennifer 8. And he was introduced to me because we were using the steam room that he usually went to after he wrapped. And it was amazing. He said, "Please come." He came on our set, and we showed him a couple of things, and he was amazed by them. And he said, "Oh, how many setups a day you do?" And I said, 35. He said, "Oh my God." And he jumped up off the Pee-wee. I had a 35 BL, and not a BL. It was the new 535. It was, and it had a nice eyepiece. He said, "Oh, I'm a Panavision guy." He said, "I've never used an ARRI before." So I went to his set, and I swear, the first day that I was on the set, he never rolled before lunch.
So he was amazed that you did so many setups a day. So how many setups in comparison?
He would do two.
2 setups a day.
It depended what the story was. But he would light happily for half a day and get away with it. There's
so
no
do you think that's
era.
the difference between the culture of big films and the culture of TV?
It is, but it was also him.
Right.
He was untouchable.
Right.
He was brilliant and a genius at lighting.
Yeah.
And he would sit on the dolly for 10 minutes at a time, and he would look, and then he'd put his forehead to the and then just lean on it and to be quiet. No one would make a peep, and you'd think he was asleep, and he was just thinking, and then he could go back and look. He'd say, "Harry, can you give me a 575 on the floor?" And he just built it up, light by light, very carefully. And the big scenes that I saw was a blind institute, and he had 12Ks. They weren't 18s in those days. We had 3 of them on a Condor, each of them, and was just pushing through full spot. Everything on him was full spot. He never did flood of light in his life.
Really?
It was all about, and also he used mirrors a lot.
Of light. He used mirrors.
He was totally into mirrors, loved mirrors.
Right.
If you look at Searching for Bobby Fischer, you can see an enormous amount of mirror use. Where there's a cut so aggressive that there's no other way to do it.
Right.
And he was just using glass.
So he likes sort of shafts of light, painting with light, building up in layers. No,
it's interesting. We have a whole era now with these reflectors.
I was going to say we can relate to that, can't we?
But he was the original guy. There's a great shot of him with a big piece of glass, holding it by hand and directing it, and it's all flared out, and you say, "Oh, amazing."
Because I also, when I was at film school, studied Nestor Almendros, who also used a lot of reflectors in his career, because he was obsessed with natural light, wasn't he?
Yes.
He used to get all the sparks to stand with a reflector and follow the sun, which is obviously quite crew heavy. And this was back in a time when, as you say, the DOP could afford to.
Definitely, on his set, it was like that. He got into trouble because after 2 weeks, they were a week behind, and the studio heavies flew up. And the scenes coming up were about 3 weeks in the Blind Institute, light out. There were no lights. They never switched them on because everybody there was blind, and the cops have to go and investigate. So they're walking down corridors at night with no lights. And the big mag light, the police mag light, had come out, and they'd gone to a xenon bulb, and we had them on our set, and I'd showed them to him. And amazingly, he just lashed on immediately. And when the executives were sitting around the trucks at night after the wrap, when they showed up, he said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he said, "Harry, fire that flashlight at me." And he pulls his meter out, and he says, 2-8, great, we're lit. And the amazing thing is, I went to the wake. It was beautiful. And the actor said what happened was he dressed up in a white hazmat suit, with great paddles of foam core taped to his hands.
And he was bouncing.
He was walking back behind the
light.
Steadicam and screaming, hit me, hit me. And so that every now and again the flashlight would come back, and that was the kickback that lit them.
Yeah.
And I think he pushed to stop. He didn't really ever tell me that.
I'd love to see the behind the scenes of this.
Yeah.
That would be so cool, wouldn't it?
Amazing image.
He was using the flashlight to bounce the light back by virtue.
Well, he had a white hazmat suit on, so any time they hit him, it was good. But he also
he was moving
he was
around
using paddle, dancing behind. Yeah. It's amazing.
It's brilliant. Did he make the time back then? For
They totally. Every night they arrived, they were ready to shoot because the only lighting were these guys with their flashlights. Yeah. And I think he put a few inkies and things from here and there. But
see, there's a parallel between his enthusiasm for a new bit of technology and how, and immediately his creative mind thinking how I can apply this.
Yeah.
And also, knowing you and having spoken to you for a bit, I can see that you still have that.
Well, we were totally enthusiastic because it was a cop show I was doing, and so in the steam room, the guys came in with their flashlights, and so we had them there.
No, but what I'm talking about is the fact that you're still so involved with the new technologies, and you still, you still have a very, if you don't mind me saying, a very childlike kind of wonder of everything and the way it's all moving.
I think the inquisitive mind is what keeps you alive. Yeah. I drink new technology and wonder how I can use it at every opportunity. I've longed for digital walls for years.
Well, I was going to say this moves us on nicely to your current sort of interests, which
we're now at an interesting time where it is possible to completely film a studio with any location you want on the planet, but it's exceedingly expensive. So for the rest of us, it's not really a viable possibility. You're looking at tens of thousands of dollars a day to be on a stage, and actually a big $18 million Mandalorian stage is probably $100,000 a day. So you have a lot of people you need to both build the wall in advance and also run it, maintain
and you were saying that it's also there's quite a long period where you have to build the backgrounds as well. So there's an Unreal 3D.
The ASC did a lovely exposure to about 80 members showed up, which was pretty unprecedented because we all wanted to know. And the basic premise was that the digital build is a 15-week period with 3D Houdini artists and so on who are building with Unreal Engine.
So just so people understand, we're talking about virtual production where you use a video wall, and then you have a camera that's the camera's tracked. So when you move the camera, you have the parallax of the background moving. So it does feel like you're in a real space, and this opens up the possibilities for filming that we've never really had in the history of cinematography.
It was in the beginning single camera only because they hadn't figured out how to put another frustrum up. The frustrum is the actual defined frame that you're shooting. And in the computer, you can make that full resolution. And the rest of the image that you don't see, you can reduce the power of it so that the computers can keep up with displaying it. They're now possible to do 2 cameras so that you alternate frames to see the other image. And they can't keep away from it. Once people build a big wall, they just want to keep pouring material. And so Disney's gone down that road heavily.
So let's talk about the 2 sort of levels of this production, because there's the high-end level that's basically like you're saying, it's a 5-week build in Unreal. There's a huge £100,000 a day hire of a what we call a volume,
volume,
which is usually about 180 degree.
It's
more.
A horseshoe shape. You have to get access to it because the walls are 30 feet high. And the panels themselves are the main cost. They're extreme, but high-end computer system to drive the wall, because you have a pixel resolution of around 20,000 on the wraparound.
And are they usually a 180 kind of angle of view?
Yes, they're curved to bring you all the way. You put your cameras where the opener of the horseshoe is, and then you can pan around anyway.
And part of the reason for that is so you can move the camera, you can pan the camera left and right.
Well, usually you put it in on a 75-foot Luma crane because you can't. Often you don't want to touch the floor. You can lay track, but it's just a lot easier with an arm.
And why do you want to avoid touching the floor?
Well, generally the floor is where the demarcation is between the wall, because if you have an actor, they need to walk on something. If you go to include their feet, you've got to make the match.
Yeah.
So that's the challenging part.
So where the floor meets the video wall.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've got to try and hide that with what prop elements or.
In the case of this demonstration, we were in a salon. So the floor was had some kind of mat on it that looked pretty believably like floors, wooden floors.
You shadow the area.
Yes,
so the
you
shadow
can actually bring a black shadow, put it on the sky that's usually there, because
so we should also explain that with this horseshoe video wall, there's usually a ceiling video as well.
Yeah. And in the case of the Mandalorian, of course, he had a chrome helmet, and so everything was reflected.
Yeah. And, so that means all the lighting was also in the actual video walls. The ambient light from the video
didn't use any lighting at all.
So no additional lighting apart from the wall.
Yeah, so it has that soft quality, which the whole series is like that, and you kind of buy into it. Occasionally they would use a backlight. In our demo, they had a couple of movers, big rock and roll movers, and some two vortex. Those 4 lights on one side, and they had a companion set 180 degrees opposite.
So there's 2 kinds of lighting on a virtual cove. There's the actual ambience from the LED walls, and then there's additional lighting that can be, like you said, either moving lights, which is it's theatrical kind of remote.
You have to plan this, because you have to pull panels out of the ceiling in order to hang a bar with some lights on it. So you really got to know. It's pretty simple. In the case of the movers, they just put shafts into the saloon. There's a little hard light coming in from the stereo windows. Yeah.
So say, for example, on the background wall, you'd have a sun, then you'd need to mimic that effect of the sun, and you'd use movers with hard lights. Yeah.
The wall is built to lock to the parallax. And if you want to unlock that, for instance, move the sun because you don't like the kind of patterns it's playing, the digital sun can be moved in real time, but then you lose your parallax, and it's a little challenging to get the parallax back. But Baz Iodine, the cinematographer that was giving this demo, he won an Emmy for Mandalorian. And Fraser, of course, was the other guy. And neither of them knew what they were doing when they were first presented with this toy. It's an amazing learning experience.
So they're learning as they were filming.
Absolutely. Because
so The Mandalorian was the first major movie that was shot using this technology?
I would say it is, yes, because no one had the money like Disney. It was exceedingly expensive in the end.
Yeah.
But they didn't care. They'll make their money back. And, of course, now they're pouring shows into the same volume to keep it active.
Yeah. So we should talk about the uses that this technology has, because there's certain uses that it's can solve significant problems for, and other uses it might not be so suited for. For example, the reason I think the Mandalorian was so successful with this technology is because his suit was shiny, right? So when you have a shiny helmet, for example, to do that green screen would cause problems in post-production.
Huge, beyond.
But there's certain tasks that virtual walls wouldn't be suited for. Traditional green screen would be way cheaper and way more, a simpler process, right?
Yeah.
But with shiny objects, so for example, with car photography, it would be another example of a good use for virtual production. So you were talking about earlier, before we were talking about the different levels of production. So there's that really high-end level, which is a big horseshoe volumes and lots of 3D rendering done beforehand. Actually, we should say at this point also that the thing about virtual production is everything has to be done before you shoot, right? Whereas traditional
There's a big lead time.
Traditional production, you shoot and you build it in post, right? So and virtual, everything has to be decided before. So when you're actually filming something on a virtual screen, all those decisions have already been made, right? And you've in a way you paint yourself into a corner of what you're shooting. If you want to change stuff later, that becomes a lot more problematic, doesn't it?
One of the big bills on Mandalorian was the fact that they changed their mind in post.
Right.
And they had to send stuff out to get rotoscoped in India.
Right.
to the tune of around $1 million an episode.
Which would have been better if they shot it on green screen at that point, do you think?
Yes, except for the reflection issues.
Right.
I mean, almost insurmountable with a chrome helmet like that.
Of course, yeah.
And also everybody's understanding of what they were actually looking at.
Right.
You know, from Star Wars on, we've done blue and green screen.
Yeah.
Oh, early before that. But nobody knew where the Millennium Falcon, when they were in there, where the fighters were coming in, what direction. They'd have to be talked through, and they never saw anything.
Yeah. So it's
the most recent version that they did on a wall, they never told the cast that they were going to go to warp speed, and then when they did it, they shit their pants. I mean,
because all the walls were
absolutely the ultimate Imagineering experience at Disney theme park.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
But what's interesting about this is we did 15 pages one day, and I think that was crazy, on 24 by using these rear projection playbacks. And we had all the cars, we did 5 cars and a helicopter, and we just had them on Gojack roller. We'd spin them around to whatever angle. And we basically shot the same way. And then we just maneuvered these smaller panels. They were about 12 to 14 feet across, and we had a projector, of course, for each.
Sorry, we're talking about the shooting of 24 car sequences using rear projection.
Yes, and that became the standard in the end. Yeah. All shows that had cops in cars, any driving, they would do it that way because it's an extreme expense. It doesn't seem like it to go out and tow a car. We were paying $15,000 to $20,000 for the cops. There's the city's permission. There's traffic issues. You're always in real traffic. They won't sweep it aside, especially if you're in New York. They don't even care. You just go out in traffic and drive. So if you want it to be a continuous take and you want to control it, you're back in the studio in green screen.
But with rear projection, you have a static camera, presumably, because you don't have the
No. We used long lenses. We would do about a 180 in the car. Right. It was amazing what we could pull off. We were very tight.
You got away with it because the background was soft, presumably.
It was soft.
Yeah.
And we would hide the screen separation on the rear strut of the car.
Right.
And we would spin it around to do side angles and so on. All things were possible in it. Yeah. But the blacks were terrible. Right. Because I had no control over them. By the time there was our lighting ambience would wash them out. And that's also a problem for big screens.
Right. So we're talking about the black levels on the screen were too light. And when you shoot that with digital film, it just looks wrong. Right?
Yeah. So interesting, the VFX guy, Stargate Studios, Sam Nicholson, he had done, when we were in New York, we pretended to be in New York for a whole season. We never went. And, downtown LA, we put up 20 by 20 green screens, a whole line of them, and he'd just replace it with Fifth Avenue or wherever. And he's now become a huge fan of smaller LED screens.
Right.
So he's running shows now where they have 16-foot screens, 2 of them, and they're doing exactly the same thing. So they're lighting in the car, but you're looking out at a moving screen, and of course they also have the up angle, and they're floating a big 12 by 20 griff with a laser projector.
The up angle will be, like you said, a textile. You bounce the projector into it, and you have all the reflections looking right on the windscreen.
Yes, right? Exactly. Yeah. And those need to be fiendishly wide. On 24, we just ended up putting a 40 by gray, hanging it over the top, because we could kind of manipulate that, and we didn't see the ceiling, and we did all kinds of tricks. And it gets heavily intensive because everybody's fiddling with the light and doing stuff. Move forward till now, where we have LED lamps that have computer control, 128 channels, and we're able to target behavior on the playback to mimic. The light will mimic what you see. So you can target and see. Yeah. And Mad Mapper, and there's a whole series of programs that will do this. Yeah, so we're talking about a moving video file. Yeah. And you have a target area, and as that file passes that target, as the image passes through the target, the contrast is mimicked and the colors are mimicked. Yes. So you're literally mimicking the ambient light of the movement of the wall on the additional lighting. Yeah. Some bridges, there's incidences where there are sodium lights just at eye level as you're driving across a bridge. So they're flashing at you in a cross shot from the driver out the window. And now you can target that light in Mad Mapper or on an app, and your light will mimic that sodium light. Instantly switch to it and switch off when it's gone. And it's just amazing.
So we got sort of two tiers of this technology then. We got the high-end tier, which is the Mandalorian, the big 180-degree horseshoe coves and everything. Yeah. And now we got this lower-end tier, which is basically using, like you said, a laser projector, potentially, and some app software.
And panels you're buying in, but they're smaller. They're not $18 million worth of panels. And for a series which is going to run 20 episodes or so on, you can amortize having that small wall or maybe even a half another wall because it's useful sometimes to get reflections and rear screen, and you can use big televisions too. Yeah. And, 90-inch television on a rack and you just move it in. But you can also push that outside a window set and pretend to be somewhere. So a lot of shows, he's doing a series, I think, that takes place in Alaska. They don't want to go to Alaska. They want to shoot in Vancouver on one of the big stages there. But they want imagery all the time. So you send a team out, and the current way seems to be, again, small cameras.
To get plates now.
Yes,
so this is no
plate
longer
shooting.
This is no longer building something as a unreal 3D world.
No.
This is simply getting plates, putting them onto a screen, and with those plates you can still get the parallax effects.
Yes, you can, because your camera's tracked and you're oversizing the screen. So you see the screen go up and down to accommodate as you move the camera up and down. Yeah. But you use 9 cameras again, and the chosen one at the moment is the Alpha series from Sony. So
this is a cluster of cameras to gather the plates.
Yeah, you split them in 2. One goes on a DJI Ronin system, fully stabilized on the front, and another one in the back. And they quite often use a
vehicle driving around to gather the plates.
Perfectly stable, and shooting at 32,000 ISO at night at 8, so everything is crisp. Yeah. So you never have an issue with that.
And the cluster is so you can get a kind of 360 view.
Yes and no. It's every shot doesn't necessarily involve a big view. Mostly it's like you're through the windscreen, you've got a 2-shot, you have singles, you have overs, you have a rear view looking out in front, and all of those angles are collected at once. So you're able to put up any angle. You spin the car, because the screens basically stay still, but they're on wheels now because they're not very big, so you can push them into position.
The car's on skates.
The car's on a set of Gojeks. Yeah.
So you spin the car around, the background spins around to match your background. Yeah. So I can see that being a very effective way of shooting cars.
And if you want to do, I'm pretending to be somewhere else, you just roll the screen to somewhere else. The interesting thing about the Sony panels is they're more expensive, but they have perfect color temp. And the screens that people have been using up until now were made for advertising hoardings in China, and they're not really that great. And you have to dumb down your lighting to match them.
Tones, matching the skin tones in the background. Yeah. That's another thing. A reason I think the Mandalorian was all set as a sci-fi environment. At twilight, right?
Yeah, you can get away with anything.
Yeah, it suited that technology. Yeah. Whereas when you're dealing with like a beach scene with hard sunlight, then it's not so easy to match, right?
We've been doing testing in LA with a small promotional studio that Sony, because they're pushing like crazy to sell these, and it's very, very effective. You can't tell you weren't on the. Sam did a little test down at the marina with 2 Venice 2s, so it's an 8K file across the top. 16K because the 2 of them stitched. Pardon?
You have footage of this?
Yeah. And we have the original footage shot on a Venice 2, and it's spectacularly good. But the key lights for those were these Chinese Pro lights, which are ACL. They're RGB ACL, so they have a 6-color engine, and they punch above their weight.
So just to explain to our viewers, ACL is amber,
cyan and lime.
Right. So
there are no white emitters in the cob.
Yeah.
What it allows you to do is expand the color to 2020. And in fact, we have something on the app where you can dumb down. It's in the controls to make it do Rec 709.
So we're talking about the color gamuts here.
Yes, so the little triangle is like this. Yeah. And then it expands to 2020. And we're able to go to 2020. Yeah. But if you're interfacing with RGB lights and other things, you have to dumb down the thing.
So we're talking about sort of the intensity of the hue. Yeah. So with a 2020 gamut, you have more intense hues when you go to the edges. With a Rec 709, it's less intense.
Yellow is a particular
Yeah.
challenge for an RGB light.
Yeah.
WW, you can't
Yeah.
get a yellow.
Right.
And the cyans and so on down there too, not
Yeah.
so often used, but a yellow is very often
Yeah.
something you want. Late afternoon
Yeah.
sunlight is a
Yeah.
classic example.
Yeah. So this allows you to get the RGB what's it? RGB
Amber, cyan, and lime.
Amber, cyan, lime. Yeah.
Yeah.
Allows you to get more saturated colors.
Yes,
when
and
it
colors
goes
that
into
you
the-
can't achieve with an
Yeah.
RGB light.
Right.
They
right.
just won't go there.
Yeah.
And also they're much dimmer when they try.
Mm.
Whereas with the 6-color engine, you keep your intensity all the way
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because the Caine flow lighting, they're Frida's been working on the skin, so his
Yes.
big thing is the skin tones.
Yes, and matching it to the chipset of the camera,
chipset
which
of
is
the
the
camera.
ultimate.
Yeah, which is a big issue. I mean, as we're basically talking about the kind of color chaos in LED
Yeah.
technology, aren't we?
Yeah.
Because every LED chip has a certain age.
Yep.
You can't get light to like sky panels, for example. You can't get the lights to kind of look the same over different lighting fixtures,
No.
and certainly different ages they start drifting as well. And what Caine Flow's tried to do is to, and I think succeeded in doing, is having an ecosystem that everything's as it should be.
Well, even in his tubes, he was a phosphor maven. He created phosphors that did all the matching for you, and that was his secret.
Yeah, so he spent 30 years understanding color science, so he's got a bit of a jump on the competition. Yeah.
But what they don't have at the moment is a hard light. So the pro light guys, we're happily, pushing this hard light, because I miss not having color. Once you get a hard light in color, it's very exciting, because you have the ability to stick shafts in places and so on. And
they're collaborating with Dado as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
Doing
Dado's doing the
optics.
lenses for them.
Yeah.
Not all of them. We have some of our own, but it's a nice collaboration, and particularly because we've made the color engine for a small Neo, an 85 watt color head. It's the same technology as in the other 3 lamps that we have, because we do have a 675 now, which is about to come out, and the little 85 watter, which everyone will want in their kit, because it's a Dado kit, like a D7 essentially, but it's full color and it takes all the accessories. So.
The other thing to talk about is, you mentioned yellow is quite a hard color to get.
Yeah.
Another color that I believe is quite tough is the sodium.
Yes.
So when you're doing 24 shows like 24, how did you get around that?
We were shooting in the streets in the valley all the time, and it was a sodium world. And we'd often, I don't say often, but sometimes we'd be in a helicopter, handheld shooting, not a rig, chasing a car, and they'd be lit with, because in the beginning I used to put blondes up and switch off all the street lights in Toronto. I didn't know any better. But we just had to embrace the sodium. It was so prevalent, and I loved the way it made the city feel.
Yeah.
But we couldn't replicate it with our own gels. The big struggle, either HMI or tungsten, to gel a light. Either Lee, neither of them did it, or Roscoe did a very good job of creating gels that matched. So we ended up buying sodium lights, and they were big, heavy things, and we would bolt them to the wall of a building and have, we could place them wherever we wanted to help us, enable us to shoot a space, basically. And Kiefer was very good about it. He never was one to think I need to be carefully lit.
Yeah.
That's a big issue in Hollywood, where the women in the show tend to want a bag light, a very nice softy, poked right above their face. And
so was the deal in 24 with the women that that might not be the way
they were on their own. In fact, Dear Soul, she's just won an Emmy for a show in Hollywood now, but she burst into tears when I started talking to her about it, because she came to me and said, I'm used to having my lights at the right place. And we've all seen those shots of divas complaining, what's that light doing there?
Yeah.
Why is that lamp there? And it has happened to me a few times. But the producer and I got together with her, and she just had to cry. She said, look, I will protect you as much as I can, but the way and the style we're shooting this, I can't do special lighting, one camera, and gild you. But nowadays I think it's a little easier, because people love soft lights so much that you can grace a set.
Mm.
And then in post, you get into resolve. You can start putting a mask on the side of the face,
Right.
and you can pull it down,
yeah.
and you add some contrast,
Mm.
and you can get that back in post.
Mm.
Chivo is a master of that.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how your lighting styles and the technology has changed over your career. Because one thing to say about your career, which I was really, when I was doing a bit of research, I couldn't believe that you pretty much shot every genre of movie possible.
Yeah.
I mean, even I was thinking, oh, you might have not done a Western. Then I found a Western, sort of horror Western, fantasy, period. I mean, every possible style of production you have had experience at. So firstly, could we talk on that a little bit? What do you have a favorite genre? Is there,
I don't think I do really. I like found light. I believe that it's possible now to go to a set if you have patience and you're not being pressured to move on, and you take a look and you can get time studies done for you. You do them yourself, but if usually someone would do a time study to tell you during the night how did this city behave, what lights came on, which didn't, and also during the day. You take out your little app on the phone and you say, well, now where's the sun going to be in 2 weeks? And I'd love to be here then, but that all goes out the window because no first AD will let you. Sometimes you can beg and borrow and they'll allow you to, but it's usually only by accident you get the sun in the right place at the right time. I did a pirate movie in the Adriatic, and we would go to sea, and it was wind in the sails because it was a 3,000-year-old pirate ship. And to get the wind and not see the land and the sun in the right place was virtually impossible. You got 2 out of 3.
So was it a kind of a process of emotionally having to sort of let that go?
You absolutely have to. You kill yourself with anxiety. And it's not that you don't struggle and that you don't have a plan, but plan B more often than not is what happens.
And do you find you get happy accidents when you let that process go a bit? Yeah.
Yes. Some of the best moments on film have always been accidental and random, and you could never have planned it. And, rainbows come out at the right time, and you're like, oh my God, please can we shoot? It's like.
So talk us through a little bit how you are on set, because I've always operated. Sometimes very rarely do I use operators, but what I find when I use an operator is I feel a little bit like
you've lost control.
I've lost, and certainly with the director, because I'm not in the conversation with the director, and the director will start splitting their energy between me and the operator, and then by the end of the shoot, they're just 100% on the operator, and I'm just sort of floating around in the background. How do you find that?
Well, I went through film school here, and so I was aware of the lighting cameraman approach in London, and so in Canada, in the very beginning, once I got an operator, I said, okay, you work with the director and I'll light. We'll discuss, we'll have a consultation, because I don't want you screwing me into a corner that I can't get out of. So I'm very much a part of that. And of course, in prep, you have your notes and you liaise with the director. But I think it's wonderful to be able to let that go. But you have to have confidence in your operator. And I had amazing operators over the years who I couldn't have looked as good without them.
Do you, as the operator brought in at the prep stage to discuss, is that, because that's really the cinematographer's responsibility, isn't it, to design the look of the
very
show? Rarely
will they pay for an operator to come.
Yeah, so you've gone through the prep with the director, and you've had all these conversations about the look. So that's a good start, because then of course I
have a closer relationship with the gaffer and the grip, because are we going to put, I need light coming through these windows. I'm saying 9Ks, and when I get there, they put Arimaxes up, and there's 9 of them, and they're 40 feet up on scissor lifts, and I'm like, I didn't ask for that, but they cathedral windows, and they totally know what they're doing, and I'm happy to have them do. One of the great things about, I had a movie that took place in New York, and it was the beginning of light panels, not light panels, sky panels, and they were suspicious of them. And they said, we're not using sky panels on this movie. I said, well, how come? Everybody's using them. They said, no, Michael Caine, Morgan Freeman, we are not going to give them bad light. And I'd seen evidence of some cameras who would take you down a dark road, and millions were spent in post on a lot of big movies because color science wasn't tracking well with what the lighting was doing, and there was patches of
missing information that's very hard to get back.
Yeah, we won't go into that. But there was a period when a lot of money was spent trying to fix things like that. So they gave me reefer lights. They said there's these New York lights, and they have these big long tubes of tungsten.
Yeah,
they drove us crazy, and they would sing occasionally. But every time, and we had kinos. We used kinos, and they were the phosphor kind at that point. We didn't have the LED versions.
Yeah.
So I was blessed with having very accurate color, and I was very, very grateful when we got to post, and I'm looking at a giant screen in the color suite, and it just looked spectacular, and we never had any issues.
What's it like to work with Michael Caine and Morgan Freeman?
They had worked on a lot of movies together, so there was an unspoken kind of camaraderie. And Alan Arkin was more challenging because he wanted to change his lines all the time.
Oh, really? Yeah.
But they would tell him off every now and again. It was, but
I remember him and Glenn Ross. Have you seen that film?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They would come on set when they were ready for them, and they would never leave. They just sat quietly in a chair. You know, people would normally I'm used to, certainly younger actors, disappearing to their trailer and having people bring them food, and, you know, they're off in another world. Or Tom Cruise walking through his blackout tent all the way to a stage from a trailer, you know, on the Panavision, on the Paramount lot.
That's a true story.
It really happens, we couldn't believe. We had to cross through this thing and go around it. Yeah. It was several hundred yards long of 20-foot tall blackouts. Right. So that he was never seen coming from his trailer. Right. To the set. Yeah. Yeah. I don't think he's quite like that now. Yeah. But I did go to the Samurai movie in New Zealand. It was shot in my hometown. And I had an operator, and the special effects guy was from 24. And I was on the set for 2 days. And then towards the end of the second day, when I came back from lunch, they said, "No, sorry, Tom, you've looked at Tom," basically.
You had to go.
I was beside the camera. Yeah. We were in the bush, and he was being picked up and put on a horse by Mafuni, and that was it. Gone. You know.
How did you find the shift from TV to film to
I was lucky in that it was technically a low budget big movie. Several of my movies have been like that, where there was barely enough money for the film and stock and processing. So it was all TV style speed and efficiency. It was Pee-wees. It wasn't anything bigger. You know, everything was scaled down slightly. So that was helpful because it was my style of working. And I knew that on the New York picture, I was hired for that. Every time we had a crane, at the end of the day, it disappeared, and we didn't get it again. Whereas on television, you carry everything because you never know what you're going to do. It can change on the dime. So if we had a crane, we carried it all the time, and we carried 18Ks and everything. But then eventually, when everything got faster, cameras got faster, we started downsizing. So we didn't carry 18s anymore, and we got rid of the 40-foot truck. So we're down to a 10-ton, and the biggest light was a 9K. And then gradually everything came down in size. You had an experience on Shameless, where the first season we were shooting on the Red 1, and it had quite a slow ISO. It was around 200. And they had 20Ks coming through the windows of all these sets. And when the Alexa came out, and I said, "I want the Alexa," they said, "Oh, you can't afford that." Because we had 2 cameras the whole time. And actually, I think we had 3 because we never did Steadicam, so there was only 2. And I said, "Well, let's bring the Alexa in and put it on the stage, and let's see what happens if we switch off the 20Ks. What can we get away with?" And in fact, we went down to a 5K, and all the money that I saved by giving back the 20Ks
paid for the Alexas.
Paid for the Alexa. And they never looked back. They were on Alexa for 10 years.
Yeah. And how did you embrace the kind of difference in aesthetics as well, of using smaller lights rather than bigger lights?
I mean, it played into my documentary experience. I used to have a set of Lowell lights and Toters and all these kind of things. They were a bit ugly in those days. You had to be careful with them. Lots of spun glass, and not putting them up if you didn't have to. Really using So now you've got 800 base, and basically we're looking at 3200 of the new version of cameras, the new Arri and the new Venice will both go to there. People are actually shooting at that. So what became a sky panel can now be an Astera tube.
Right, yeah.
And so suddenly you have a whole other level. You're seeing into the dark differently. And in post, you can do a lot more. And Chivo absolutely showed us how to do that with that lovely movie in the theater where there were 360s all the time. And Birdman.
Yeah.
And he spent, 6 months in post.
Everything was practical, right? All the lights were practical.
Absolutely.
So the camera could go anywhere.
And it was relatively flat because it was the nature of it. But whereas I couldn't do it in 24, and I didn't know that you could do that, and we didn't have the tech either. But now that everybody with a laptop can get Resolve and have a neural engine and do the most amazing tracking just with a new, 16-inch Mac, it's just absolutely astounding.
So we're talking about having something lit flat and then later on putting contrast into the face with Resolve.
Absolutely.
Right.
And doing that in real time, making a change as people move through the frame. You can bring it up and take it down.
Right. So you can have dynamics on it as they're
Absolutely have
moving.
dynamics on them. Yeah. Because when you're doing 360s, there's no room for negative fill. A negative fill is your friend.
Yeah.
If you're on a single camera deal, if you don't have negative fill, you're not lighting. And so, yes, we all know where the key is, but to know how to hide the fill and to control the contrast is the magic button that is important for modern cinematography.
Right.
At the moment you do a 180, you say, whoa, where did my negative fill go?
Yeah.
I'm screwed.
That's the first thing I do when I walk into a space is think where I'm putting the blacks up.
Yeah.
And then you see what you get, and then you add, my process is getting the ambience down to the shape I like, and then putting the accents in where I feel they're necessary, right?
Yes.
Whereas the traditional way of lighting was having a big old light through a window, and then building, and then sort of shaping it from there, right?
Yeah.
So it's a completely different philosophy in a way.
Totally.
Yeah. And
I think with this new Arri 35 with 17 stops at dynamic range, I had a chat with Eric Messerschmidt. And talking to him about using that camera, he shot one of the short films. And we all went to the DGA, and they have a really good laser projector. And they were screening. There was 2 young kids in a house. You can find it online. And it's very lovely. And the director was a wonderful guy. 360, no lights.
This is the view outside the window.
Yes.
And then they're silhouetted inside.
Yes.
This is the dem film of the Arri 35.
Yeah, and to give you an indication of how much light flows around when you have a naturally lit room, he had to cover everything outside the frame with black duvetine.
Yeah.
The best quality. And he said the only thing I put in there was a tiny little piece of white beadboard that I held in my hand that put a tiny hit in the eyes.
Yeah.
But he said if I took that away, they were silhouettes.
Right.
But he had to put all this black in to achieve that. But at the same time, he's seeing sunny sky, blue sky, clouds. Everything is outside the window. It's perfect. Yeah. And so I can't wait to get my hands on that camera.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're just very hard to get hold of now because they're struggling to build them.
That's right. Yeah, it's quite a demand, I hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably the future. The Venice 2 has got a similar kind of quality. I don't think it has the same dynamic range.
Do you think the Venice feels a bit more digital and the Arri feels a bit more filmy?
I think it's about the glass after that.
Right.
And of course, that segues into old glass.
Yeah.
The best imagery that I've ever shot was with old 30-year-old Panavision anamorphics. And then of course we can go down the FD route.
Yeah, right.
With the radioactive glass elements and what they do to the image. And I do think, because I grew up with old Nikons and Canons from the beginning when I was a teenager, shooting with those cameras as stills lenses. And now we find that we can have them rehoused and made useful so that a focus puller can actually work with them.
Is it something that's nice about kind of, it's like old bottle, new wine, kind of combining old technology with new technology?
Yeah.
It's something very, we're both the analog digital generation.
Yeah.
Half our careers are spent analog and now digital.
Well, the absolute need appeared when we were obliged by Netflix to go to 4K if we wanted to sell our product. And I always thought that the 2.8K out of an Alexa Super 35 was, when it was raw, recorded raw, is unbeatable. But going to 4K just gave you all that much more imagery, and there were catastrophic moments with the girls and the women over makeup and hair and wardrobe
all the
issues.
pores of the skin being seen.
You couldn't get away with the stuff that you get away with normally. And 4K took you into that whole new realm. And modern lenses they keep thrusting on us are all designed by computer, and they're basically perfect. I love the fact that Arri made a set of anamorphics that were so good you couldn't tell them from the sphericals.
You can tell the anamorphic, because all the characters have been
sucked out of them. And they went crazy and spent a lot of money trying to put filters on one end and filters on the other end. And I'm sure they have their use and people use them. But I much prefer the old glass in anamorphic. In anamorphic over spherical at any time.
It's the flaws that are the character. That's what people,
Absolutely.
I mean, I have this sort of theory whereby I quite like Cooke glass and Leica glass. And my theory is when because Cooke are the only manufacturer that just manufacture motion picture glass. They don't manufacture stills glass.
Yes.
So because of that, they can be quite unique in their approach.
Yeah.
And I think that the way an eye scans a still image, you're looking from edge to edge. So therefore, the drive in having a flat kind of plane with everything sharp and everything rendered perfectly works.
Fall off.
Works for stills. Works for stills. It makes sense for stills because you scan the image. But when it comes to motion picture, we travel through an image, right? And it's more center weighted, and we have this whole foveal vision kind of perception of the world anyway, which would mean that having a center sharp and fall off would make sense for us emotionally. And that's the way Cooke designed their glass, and I think that's why they have that kind of dimensional quality. They have that kind of three-dimensional quality. And the edges are vignetting, the colors.
I bought a set of classics. It was my first series glass, and we didn't have them all in the beginning, and so we were supplementing them. But I found that a couple of them had curvature fields that I couldn't deal with, and I ended up selling them. But they've become very successful because they're housed in the right.
When you say classics, they're Cooke classics.
The Cooke classics.
Speed Pancros, is it?
They are re-envisioned Speed Pancros in a modern housing.
Oh, right.
And they read out.
Yeah.
You can see your stop and everything electronically.
Right.
Those were replicated the old Speed Pancros, which frankly, some of the greatest movies ever shot were shot with them.
Have you seen their history reel?
No.
Cooke have a history reel. They call it the Cooke Look history reel.
Yeah.
And it's pretty much every film you remember growing up with. That's the best. That's the best show reel I've ever seen for events.
It's amazing. But it's fun to go to the factory there and see the old belt-driven polishing
they still have
machines.
Traditional machinery, right? They haven't changed anything.
No.
So, I mean...
Well, they do. They do have some modern componentry. But it's interesting, by contrast, Sigma make, I played with some of their lenses recently, and they're all done, they actually mold them. They don't polish them, and their machinery is at such a point. Interestingly, at Arri in the factory, which I visited last week, the lathes in the basement are all Japanese. They're not German.
Right.
And I thought, this is interesting.
Yeah. What they're more modern lathes? Or?
Yeah, 5-axis machining the parts for the body and so on. And obviously, that kind of they didn't make lenses in that factory, but obviously they're made by the same kinds of caliber of machines with tolerances in the millionths of a centimeter, crazy. It's
like everything in the world now. There's so few manufacturers of everything's got so specialist now.
Yeah.
You have like one manufacturer of LED chips in the world, or two manufacturers.
It's crazy dangerous. We're in deep trouble now because half the stuff you want you can't buy because there's a supply chain issue.
Yeah. And
Arri's only making a small number of cameras because they're having terrible trouble getting components.
Yeah. So one of the, just talking about the Arri waiting list for the 35 and also the fact that glass prices are going up so much.
Yeah.
Supply and demand. Everyone is shooting content now. When you think about what the amount of cameras that Arri would sell to the film industry 20 years ago compared to what they're selling to the whole of the kind of content industry now, it's pretty mind-boggling, I would imagine.
I think Netflix has done an amazing job in adopting countries, selling the American product, but then encouraging the local. And suddenly you find Squid Game and so on, stuff coming out that's completely in a foreign language with subtitles, and it wins Emmys and so on, And, there's all of Indonesia, there's India, we've always had Bollywood, but now increasingly there's Bollywood product coming out on Netflix.
Right.
Or there's French product.
You were saying earlier about the China Film School.
Oh, yeah.
The Shanghai Film School.
Yeah, no, a good friend of mine is teaching at the Shanghai Film School. There's 2,500 students, and they have 5 or 6 giant stages. They have dubbing theater. They have all the equipment. They have about 100 minis. It's just crazy.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things with Setnotes is what we try and do, trying to kind of create a sort of mentorship program again, and try and educate people. Because what I've realised, certainly here in the UK, is you have the kind of culture of cinema, which is, fundamentally you work your way up through the camera department. It was kind of like a mentor sort of program, and now you have the videographer world, which people basically, less and less people go into film school. Film school's so expensive now, so people basically buy a bit of equipment and
go on YouTube.
Yeah, go onto YouTube, learn what they need to. But with that, we've lost a little bit of the craft and that kind of apprenticeship model. So I just wanted to talk to you about a little bit about what you hold dear about the craft, what you would say the craft is in cinematography, and what the big lessons you've learned over the years. Any sort of tips you might have for the younger filmmakers.
I think I came in at a time when discipline was still pretty important, and the gaffer had a best boy, and God forbid that this or that would happen. The electrics all kind of...
So a real strict hierarchy of the set.
Before phones came on sets, people would sit quietly and observe and watch their gaffer and so on to see if there was an indication that they needed to do something. Everybody, of course, has radios, but radios were off during when you're rolling. But now I find so many people are on their phones when they're stood down while we were rolling. And there's a certain disrespect about that is kind of tonally changed things. If we never had phones on set on 24, but God forbid if Kiefer looked out of his corner of his eye and saw someone in a corner playing a game on a phone, the shit would have hit the fan.
Yeah,
because it does alter the set spirit,
Yeah,
and there's nothing better than having a team of people whom you intimately trust with the creative input they're giving. Because film is absolutely a team industry. You can't make a film by yourself. I mean, you kind of can, but it doesn't mean that you're always going to be able to do that. Every story has its own requirements. And once you start spending money, there's lots of other people that need to be involved, and they will help you tremendously. Production designer, for instance, extraordinarily valuable relationship for a cinematographer to understand the needs of the tone and discuss and evaluate the kind of approach that you want to making the world, which we would then photograph. We would light it, but it helps tremendously to have input in colors and tone and how everything is designed.
What kind of prep time would you have on your on most of your
on the hard television stuff? None at all. But you were lucky. If you were lucky, you worked with someone who you
worked with before,
you trusted, and you relaxed, and they would come to you every now and again if there was a problem.
Would you get recommended jobs through a set designer? Would you recommend?
I don't know that ever happened, but I was happy to recommend the production designer, after I'd worked with them. And they did show up often. Had a good one in Toronto in the very beginning. Yeah. An ex-architect who stumbled onto the business and, got hooked.
Right.
And he was wonderful. There's still a lot of construction necessary. We would spend, on 24, we spend $1 million every season just on a standing set, which was CTU in that case.
What's CTU?
CTU was the Central Counterterrorism Unit,
right?
Which was the headquarters. Surprisingly, when we went to Washington, we did shoot there for a couple of weeks. We got invited to CIA headquarters, and we were shown. It was a love fest. We were shown their control room for the CIA's maintenance of terrorism.
You'd think that would be out of bounds, wouldn't it?
They were happy to show us, and yes, the screens had innocuous material, and they were surrounded by giant screens and projector systems. There were about 15 people working at triple monitors. There was a controller, and off to the one side was the CIA, and then the other side were the other Secret Service agencies. They all had access to the control room. And then they took us to a boardroom, and all the monitors came up out of the table. The table opened like a clamshell. And then they said the Disney's Imagineering guys had designed it for them. But we were suspicious. We thought, a lot of this looks a little bit like CTU. And we'd been going for a few years by then too. So
Right. So your production designer had some kind of insight into...
He had a good feeling.
Yeah,
I mean, we really kind of anticipated the large screen playback and real-time analysis of what's going on. But you can go back to The Bomb. What's that wonderful film? God, black and white, in the big control room.
You mean Stanley Kubrick's film?
Yeah.
Dr. Strangelove.
Yes, Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah.
I think... people in the industry, given enough freedom, can envisage the most extraordinary structures that stand the test of time.
Do you prefer lighting sets, or do you like to start with reality and look at shooting locations?
Lighting sets is the first thing is now it's all changed because we have LEDs. I did a series called The Last Ship, and I was brought on after they'd started, and they had put 1,000 quasar tubes into the set to light the backing. And I thought, this is interesting, because at that point we still couldn't dim kinos. And it was day, it was a gray sea, and they built a full-scale bridge of an Arleigh Burke class destroyer where everything was absolutely real, because we went to the Arleigh Burke down in Pasadena, down in San Pedro, and we would get on the ship and we'd be on the bridge and you couldn't tell which was which. But outside ours, we had a backing. It was just a painted backing of a seascape. But when we went to night, we just took the lamps down to 1%, and suddenly it was night. And we switched off the tungsten and let the other color play more.
Wonderful control.
Yeah, it was like, oh my God, how amazing is this? Fully justified the expense. And the idea that you have lights now that will go from 100% to 1% and still have color accuracy, more or less, is mind-changing. And none of those were on 24 when I was lighting. Modern sets, I haven't had sets that big. We did do one. I did a pickup shoot for a guy, and we were actually using these Kineflows, the new ones.
The LED
Freestyles.
Freestyles,
Yeah. And they were very satisfying. It was nice to be able to shoot the ends of them and not see a controller.
What I love about it's a control of the egg crate, the honeycomb control.
Yes.
And you can strip them down, and you can, it's just very...
Well, we used for the longest time, we used small heads with a Chimera 2x3, and everything had honeycombs on it.
Well, this is tungsten lights, or this is
they were tungsten. This was on Shameless. And we lit all of that with these small boxes with a very rigid honeycomb on, quite deep, so we control. Really, but it was always a soft light. We put pars through the window, 1K pars, and that's all we brought in as sunlight. And of course, when you get to a higher ISO,
1K pars.
Rock and roll par. Par 64, open globe, narrow beam one.
The Parkans.
Yeah.
Right. 1K Parkans through windows.
Yeah.
This is locational.
Studio? No, this was on studio set.
I was going to say, right.
They were pushing through our windows.
Yeah.
And you can get away with those now.
Well, as sunlight coming through.
As sunlight, of course, you want it to be blue, so you're going to lose quite a bit if you put a CTB on it.
Yeah.
But because we're now making that leap to 3200 ISO, 34,500, these lights become powerful lights.
Yeah, and they're cheap to hire as well.
They're very cheap to hire. In fact, my advice for anyone wanting to start out in lighting would be to buy an old rock and roll par. And get a couple of like the wide beam and the narrow beam and the fire starter. The fire starter is the most amazing light.
What's the fire starter?
The fire starter is a 1200.
Yeah.
They're built for aircraft landing lights.
Right.
and they have maybe about a 7 degree or maybe
And this
less.
is another Parcan, so it's a 12.
And you sit it in a Parcan. You can either get them open without the actual can.
Yeah.
The rock and roll ones always have a can.
Fire starter.
They're cheaper, and they make $50 for that.
Do you use source falls as well? 'Cause
Yeah.
I used to love that. For me, when I first started, my poor man's version of Lightstream, the dado system, was source falls into bits of silver that I'd find.
Yes. We always carried them, and in fact, I well remember the first time I saw that 5-degree lens, this giant piece of plastic glass Fresnel. And that was very, very useful. Very useful. And you could shape it. I like the idea we ended up with the lusters because they had a color head in them. And so if luster was a color head that had the source 4 attachment.
Yeah.
And if you were in a set and you wanted a little bit of a kick on someone's hair and you were late to the party, you suddenly said, oh my God, give me a luster here, shape it, narrow strip. And then let's just put a little bit of blue in it or warm it up, or, it was like.
So you seem to like a similar way I attempt to is.
I mean, when I saw your page on Instagram, I thought, oh my God, this is unbelievable. So wonderful.
Well, it's a similar kind of philosophy of basically starting, because you started with a documentary background. So you start with the reality. Yeah. You shape the reality by putting negative in, and then you find little thin paintbrushes of light to accent the points you're interested in. Yeah. Which, I've always, I could, speaking of these Parcans and source force and stuff, that's a very effective way of doing it. So, as you're saying, advice to young filmmakers would be get yourself some of these cheaper tungsten lights, and a load of black, I guess.
Well, if you go into a room with a fire starter and just bounce it off objects in the room, you've got to be careful because you can burn them. It's an aggressive light. Yeah. But you will see everything that room will give you just by panning it around. Right. And then if you want to control it, you can put it into beadboard, or you can put it, and then. Yeah, no,
that's a beautiful experiment, isn't it? Because it's like the flow of light in the room. Because light comes through the window, say, for example, and it bounces around the room. Yeah. And you're using a light to enhance that process. Yeah. Which is what a great cinematographer tries to do, is to see what is actually naturally occurring and then to enhance it for dramatic effect. Right? Yeah. That's the role, in a way, of what we try to do.
The light stream system gives you the ability to easily and relatively easily put a small half-meter size bounce into the corner of a room, and then you just shape a light and hit it and control it, and it doesn't overspill. And you can achieve a lot of character in a space pretty easily and cheaply now.
It's this fine paintbrushes, so it's having a very sensitive camera, and these fine paintbrushes of light that allow us to do this kind of.
And your biggest drawback is that you inevitably will forced to shoot in a room that's got white walls. Right. And the first question you ask is, can we afford to paint this? Yeah. And it's not about the painting, it's repainting it back to what the building you're in, the house, whatever. Will they let you? Yeah. But usually 50% of the time you lost that battle.
And if you can paint it, do you go for a mid-grey normally? Is that kind of...
yes, you would want to go to something that gives you some control over the spill and the bounce, because no matter what, especially with kinos and so on, even with grids, you're still going to have a lot of spurious light floating around. The ceiling was the worst thing. How do you control the ceiling? Because
do you have any tips on that?
Well, you can. Duvatine's too heavy to stitch up there. I don't really. It really is huge if you can get a space which you can paint, do whatever you want to. Yeah. Obviously, on a stage, you can leave it open, and they'll put duvetine around the sides so that nothing bleeds in. But of course, the stage is black above, so you get away with much more control than being in an 8.5 foot ceiling. Drives you crazy. Yeah, there's not a lot you can do.
I was trying to think of a way of devising a rig whereby you could have a C stand and these kind of spring arms that come out and push against the ceiling. Yeah. And you could put black, you could have like a kind of fly, like a fly swatter type thing. So you have to sort of, and I was going through many iterations of this and I still haven't come up with something that's practical that works.
Well, speaking of that, the tool that really helped us tremendously was the Matthews Max arm. I don't know whether you've used that.
I love the Max arm. Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic tool. And we would put a piece of 20-foot pipe on the end of it and sling a kino on it. So we could get it out almost 30 feet.
You put pipe on the end of the Max arm?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, you
just need more counterweight, right?
Did you ever use Sun, what are they called? 200,000 watt. They've got a big one. I did use that one time. That was extraordinary. Soft Suns.
Yeah.
But they made a small 3,000 watt soft sun that we could get out almost 30 feet.
And this is on the Max arm?
Yeah.
Right. The Max Menace, isn't it?
The Max Menace.
Matthews Max Menace.
They got an Oscar for it, and deservedly so.
Yeah, because the geometry is completely unique, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. But by adding the pipe with a lighter head, you could achieve
So it's almost like
depth.
having a portable studio, I think, because you can get a heavy light completely over the top of the middle of a set.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I go into a studio, I try and avoid using a rigger, and I try and do most things from the floor. So when I saw this light, I was thinking, well, you don't even need a studio now.
No. And you can move it, swing it, rotate it, just as it takes shape. You can modify it.
Yeah.
But you have a lot of buildings that you go in here that you can't touch the walls. You have to be very careful.
Yeah, particularly in this country. Yeah.
We had our versions of that, and I love the Max arm for being able to put a small Kino as a backlight or a rim, or just poke it where you wanted it to be without touching the ceiling.
Tell me a little bit about how you work with your gaffer. Do you have a kind of long-standing relationship with us?
I did have a long time with a gaffer, and he was wonderful because I'd wave my hands, and then suddenly there'd be a dozen cream sauce in the early days up, and we had a good relationship. He was very much in favor of downsizing from the 40-footer. So once we got into the Alexa and understood how much we could push the ISO, we downsized everything.
So a smaller
stopped
vehicle.
Carrying. Smaller vehicle, you could get anywhere with it, but you're up against the owners of the trucks, the Teamsters, and you have political issues that you have to be very gentle about. And you give back a generator, the generator operator is not going to get that rented out in a small town where you're the only game in town and they're not happy.
Right.
But we are increasingly being able to light with block batteries.
Right. This is the future without question. There's a big movement in London now for minimising the carbon footprint of these diesel generators. Certainly, getting dispensation in central London for a diesel generator is going to become impossible over the coming years, I think. Yeah. So I do think lithium battery technology is where it's going to.
I started by tying in, but that's a dangerous procedure. In modern buildings, you can't get near their systems. I think the batteries are a great idea. We ended up just using small putt-putts for an M18. You want a little shaft down the end of a street. You drag off a lamp and a stand and a putt-putt.
Honda do a EU70, which is a great little and that's petrol. So at least you can still use that in London, I think.
Of course, people have issues with noise, but you'd run a 50-foot, 100-foot Stinger out and park it in a field, and you never heard it. I'm absolutely certain the big tractor trailer unit with a 1700 amp Jenny on it is gone. I did have fun in the old days, though, with scissor arcs, making lightning, because we were doing a horror series.
Yeah, I remember I talked a director into using one of those because David Lynch famously uses them because you get all the different colours. The arcs all different colours. So when you use a normal strobe, it's just white lights off and on, binary. But with a scissor arc, you get the kind of weird magentas.
And it glues itself together, and you have to pull it apart with these wooden scissors. But the generators take a hell of a pounding. So I remember one night after the generator drove away, there was lead on the ground from the thing had melted. And it was just
that reminds me of the old. Did you ever use the old carbon arc lights?
Yeah. I was lucky. I was doing a Hollywood movie. It was a Stephen King thing, and the gaffer, I'd acquired the gaffer from Laszlo Kovacs because I didn't have a crew in LA. I was just suddenly thrust down there. I'd done a thing called
the documentary
Psycho 4 with this director, and he took me on this.
Because you did a documentary on Laszlo and Vilmos.
No. I was doing a feature, and I arrived and I had the director, and it was all set up, and I didn't have a crew. Didn't know anybody.
Right. And
Laszlo said that through people reached out and said, you can have my crew. And so I got his whole crew. I didn't have to think about it. And when we got on the stage, it was Warner Brothers, and they came to me. We had an indoor-outdoor set, and outside you could see the garden on this interior. And they said, we've got you some white carbon arcs. And I said, really? And they went and dragged them. They were all in storage in the back area somewhere, and they dragged them. I said, we got some carbons. We're so lucky to get these carbons, because that was the problem. Nobody made the carbons anymore, quite apart from the smelliness and the haze in the air and so on. But they were beautiful. They were totally sunlight. I never questioned it at all.
Yeah.
And for years I've used
thing we had to
HMI,
sunlight pretty much, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't think you can ever beat those.
No.
There is this new, someone's telling me this new, is it K35, do an 18K that's got this ceramic disc. It's a ceramic disc, so it's like more of a point source than the ARRI 18K. I don't know, but still nowhere near a carbon arc. That point source of a carbon arc can never really be beaten.
That's all about the challenge for the LED manufacturers, because even with a good carb, they're around that size. They're too big, yeah. And if you take like a little 12-volt dado, 150 watt, it's about. I think Dado's told me that at this seminar, he said it's like 2 to 3 millimeters. Is the arc.
So you get a nice hard shaft of light. He used to do a light called a 436 as well, which is a 400 watt 36 volt bulb, which is that size but 400 watts. Right. And that's the hardest light. So when I started my career doing hair commercials, I used to use that light all the time to try and get the shine in the hair. Yes. We used to have to use hard light to get the shine in the